Caleb Turner rolled the 12 silver dollars across the trader's table one by one, listening to the hard, final ring each coin made against the wood. It wasn't much money, barely enough for a tired horse, but the animal tied outside caught his eye the moment he'd seen it. Strong legs, steady gaze, the kind of spirit that didn't break easily. The trader scooped up the coins, hesitated, then leaned closer. "Silver's fine," he said, lowering his voice. "But the horse belongs to the Comanche chief now. You'll need his word." By sunset, Caleb found himself standing at the edge of a Comanche camp. Dust on his boots, nerves tight in his chest, fires flickered like low stars, and children's laughter mixed with the murmur of voices. Chief Red Elk listened as Caleb explained the bargain, his expression unreadable. When Caleb finished, the chief rose slowly and walked toward the horse, placing a hand on its neck as if greeting an old friend. He spoke of how the horse had wandered into their lands injured and thin, how it had been fed, treated, and trusted. $12, he said, covered the feed. It did not cover responsibility. Then came the words Caleb never expected. As part of the deal, Red Elk said, his 2 daughters would go with him for a season. They would see how the horse was treated, how Caleb lived, and whether respect guided his hands. If dishonor followed, the horse would return, and the silver would mean nothing. Caleb's first instinct was refusal. He straightened, voice firm, saying he wouldn't buy a horse with people attached to it. Red Elk met his gaze without anger. "They are not payment," the chief replied calmly. "They are witnesses, and they will choose." The 2 young women stepped forward. Aiyana's eyes were sharp and curious, her posture fearless. Nita stood quieter, steady as still water. Aiyana spoke first, saying she wanted to see the world beyond the river, to measure the man who claimed the horse. Nita nodded in agreement. The choice settled like weight on Caleb's shoulders. He realized this bargain was no simple trade. It was a test of character. With a slow breath, he agreed, knowing that the true cost of the $12 horse would be counted not in coins, but in honor. The ride away from the Comanche camp was long and quiet, broken only by the rhythmic sound of hooves pressing into the earth. Caleb rode ahead, uncertain of his place, while Aiyana and Nita followed at an easy distance, watching the land as if it were speaking to them. The horse, still unnamed, moved calmly between worlds, no longer wild yet not fully claimed. Caleb felt the weight of the chief's trust with every mile, heavier than the saddle on his back. By the time they reached the ranch, the sky had turned the soft gold of late evening. Caleb showed them the small cabin, the corral, and the stretch of land he worked alone. He explained his routines, his fences, and his rules, careful not to sound like a man giving orders. Aiyana asked sharp questions. Why fences mattered, why land needed to be marked, why a man would claim something the wind could cross so easily. Caleb answered as honestly as he could, admitting that some things were done simply because that was how he'd been taught. Work began at dawn. Caleb put himself alongside them rather than above them, fixing rails and drawing water from the well. Nita watched closely, learning the rhythm of the ranch before offering her own knowledge. When a calf refused to eat, she brewed a bitter mixture from herbs she'd gathered nearby. And by the next morning, the animal stood stronger. Caleb didn't question it. He simply nodded his thanks, realizing he was not the only teacher here. Aiyana spent hours with the horse, brushing its coat, speaking softly in her own language. She noticed how Caleb handled it, firm but gentle, never raising his voice. When the horse startled at a sudden noise, Caleb calmed it with patience rather than force. Aiyana's gaze lingered on him then, measuring, weighing. Not all eyes were kind. Neighbors passed by more often than usual. Curiosity edged with suspicion. Whispers followed them in town, and once Caleb found his fence cut clean through. He repaired it without complaint, choosing caution over confrontation. Aiyana asked why he didn't seek revenge. Caleb answered that anger only bred more trouble, and the land remembered every violent step taken upon it. As days turned into weeks, something quiet began to form. Between them, an understanding, built from shared labor and respect. The ranch felt different, fuller. Caleb began to see that the chief's daughters were not there to judge alone. They were there to change him just as surely as the land was. Spring arrived slowly, stretching the days and softening the land around the ranch. The grass grew thicker, the cattle stronger, and the horse, now called Copper, moved with a confidence that reflected the care it received. Caleb no longer felt watched in the way he once had. Instead, he felt accompanied. Aiyana and Nita worked beside him as if the ranch were a shared responsibility rather than a test, still waiting to be judged. The visit from Chief Red Elk came without warning. One morning, dust rose on the horizon, and by noon, he stood at the edge of the corral, silent and observant. Caleb felt his chest tighten, knowing this moment would decide everything. He didn't rush to speak. Instead, he finished his work, watered the horse, and greeted the chief with the same respect he offered any guest. Red Elk walked the land slowly. He inspected the fences, the herd, and finally Copper. The horse lowered its head calmly beneath the chief's touch, its coat shining, its body strong. Red Elk turned his gaze to Caleb, then to his daughters. He asked no leading questions. Only one simple thing: whether the bargain had been honored. Caleb answered truthfully. He spoke of the work they shared, the lessons learned, and the dangers avoided. He admitted his fears and his mistakes, but also the choices he made to protect peace over pride. When he finished, Aiyana stepped forward. She spoke of respect shown without demand, of a man who listened before acting. Nita followed, quietly but firmly, saying they had not been treated as payment, but as equals. The chief listened, then reached into his pouch and placed the 12 silver dollars back into Caleb's hand. He said the money was never the true price. Honor was. By keeping it, Caleb had earned more than a horse. He had earned trust. Copper would remain on the ranch, not as property taken, but as a bond shared. Before leaving, Red Elk offered a new agreement, one built on cooperation rather than exchange, shared grazing in hard seasons, safe passage through the land, and help when need outweighed pride. Caleb accepted, understanding that this promise carried more value than any written contract. As the chief and his daughters prepared to return home, Caleb watched the prairie stretch endlessly before them. He knew this story would be told again someday, not as a tale of a cheap horse, but of a man measured by what he chose to protect rather than possess. Summer settled over the ranch with a golden heat that made the mornings feel soft, and the evenings hum with life. Caleb woke earlier than ever, the horizon a pale wash of light before the sun broke fully. Copper moved beside him, steady and strong, reflecting the care and attention poured into it over the months. Aiyana and Nita had grown into the rhythms of ranch life, no longer guests, no longer witnesses, but companions in the work and the quiet triumphs that came with it. The wind carried stories through the tall grass, whispers of a bargain kept and a trust earned. The land itself seemed to respond to their presence. Fences held steady, cattle grazed calmly, and even the wild creatures stayed at a respectful distance. Caleb noticed how Aiyana could read the sky like an open page, predicting storms before clouds even gathered. Nita could sense the subtle signs of illness in the herd, moving with quiet efficiency to tend to any animal in need. Caleb had once thought he knew the limits of his land, but with them beside him, he realized the ranch was larger than any single person's vision. It was a living, breathing place that required care, patience, and respect from all who walked it. One afternoon, a rider appeared on the horizon, a neighbor who had once been skeptical of Caleb's deal with the chief, dust swirling. Around him, he called out warnings of bandits moving nearby and offered to help patrol. Caleb accepted, knowing the value of cooperation. Together, they rode the edges of the property, alert and silent except for the occasional word. Copper moved effortlessly, guided by hands that had learned trust over force. Aiyana and Nita rode beside Caleb, laughing quietly when the wind caught their hair, reminding him that life was about more than bargains or debts. It was about connection and courage. As night fell, the three returned to the cabin, worn but satisfied. A fire crackled, its warmth reflecting in their eyes, and Caleb realized how much had changed in just a few months. The $12 horse had been the beginning of something far greater, a lesson in honor, respect, and partnership. He thought of the chief and his daughters, of the trust they had placed in him, and understood that some bargains could not be measured in coins. They were measured in choices, in care, in the integrity of keeping one's word. That night, Caleb sat quietly on the porch, listening to the whispers of the prairie, feeling the steady heartbeat of the land beneath him, and understood fully that the deal he had made was not about ownership. It was about earning a place in a world larger than himself. And in that truth he found a satisfaction no silver could ever buy.